So I guess I'm up next. Basically, we're going to have one talk from every state over the next 3 semesters, but there are 8 states and 9 slots. And so I took the 9th slot. So we have 2 talks today from Minnesota. So let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a bit different. We're in each of these sessions of TED Talks, we thought we'd have one research presentation, one specifically higher education presentation, and then one presentation that was on something else, whether it's teacher training or outreach. And so what I've decided to talk about is what I call astronaut training, using rideable hovercraft or hoverboards. And so this is a fun activity, sometimes slightly too fun. Got to make sure that you keep the education in there. But I think this is very, very appropriate for space grants. And so what I want to do is try to make a case for rideable hoverboards. But before I do that, I actually want to show you what they look like. So let me just switch over to showing a quick video. And it turns out that one of the issues with hoverboards is that they're loud. And so what I'm going to try and do, if I can, is keep the volume of the videos down and just talk over the top of them. Essentially, this is what a hoverboard looks like and what it can do. So first of all, it can hover, but then it can hold a significant amount of weight, including more than one person. Coincidentally, these videos, all of them, except for the last one I'll show you, were taken in a hallway when I was getting some students of mine ready to take hoverboards out, and I wasn't going to be there, so I wanted to show them a little bit about how they work. This is one of the challenges of these things. You need a flat floor, and here at the University of Minnesota, all of our classrooms are carpeted, so that doesn't work well. And so once in a while in these videos, you'll see people walking by in the background because we were in a public hallway at the time. So here we go, back to my case. So these are kinesthetic. They allow people to feel what's going on, not just hear about it, not just see pictures. And frankly, I wish I could have everybody who's listening here ride one, and then you would get the kinesthetic part. They are very engaging and educational for all ages. So frankly, I've used these. In this case, I was talking to college students about using these with pre-college students, but I've used these with adults. I've used these with little kids. And you can use them in many, many contexts, not just for many ages. For instance, in physics contexts, you can talk about Newton's laws of motion, of which there are 6, 3 pairs if you must. Space connections, this is pretty obvious for space grant. Astronaut training is what I'm going to give as an example here, but I brought these out for classes that are trying to do spacecraft control, and you find out right away, why is it that astronauts move so slowly, and what are some of the things you need to watch out for, and how can you fix some of these things as you imagine spacecraft and designing spacecraft and controlling them. And then outreach. Again, most of my slides here will be related to outreach, but this is not the only context. So, I mean, here's the long and short. Everybody should have one. Every space grant should have one. Frankly, you should have 2. Every physics teacher should have a couple of these. I think these are very useful for many activities, and they can get kids really involved. So, first of all, let me just tell you a few of the parts. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the parts on the screen here, and then I'm actually going to switch to another camera and show you some of the parts. So you have a hoverboard. It's a 4-foot diameter circle. Often you'll want 2. You'll need an air source. I use a shop vac. I encourage a seat. If not sitting on a seat, then perhaps sitting on the surface. Don't stand up. You'll fall off. I like to use bungee cords to pull on these things and pull rods like PVC pipe. A torque ladder, you'll see that in a video in a moment. I didn't bring that with me. A spinning bicycle wheel, and a carbon dioxide fire extinguisher. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch to, one moment. I'm going to see if I can switch to a different video. And stop sharing. There we go. Okay, so now the question is, what's big on your screen? It is, I can see Richard big on my screen, but I think you can see the hovercraft on your screen. This is good. So I'm going to step over here and talk a little louder. Here's a hoverboard. I happen to have it sitting on top of a table, so I'm not going to try riding it. It's 4 feet across, and here is my shop vac. And when I turn on the shop vac, it'll be noisy. I need to make sure the air is going underneath the hoverboard. That's important. Here we go. And the seat, basically the seat is not attached to the board, but just sits on the board. And then the idea is you can move it around as you need to, because one of the things you have to do is when somebody gets on one of these, you have to make sure they're well balanced. If they're not well balanced, they'll tip. And if they tip, then they'll touch. And if they touch, then the friction comes back and it's kind of pointless. So these are kind of my main pieces. Other things that I like to use. So a wheel for some of the demonstrations I'll show you in a minute. A meter stick with some bungee cords attached to it, so you can pull the bungee cord and apply a specific amount of force and then keep that amount of force as you do a demonstration. Constant force. And then, of course, our favorite, a modified fire extinguisher. You wouldn't want to fight a fire with this. I've taken off the important parts that scatter the carbon dioxide, and now the carbon dioxide comes out really strong. So it's a thruster, but it's not for fighting fires anymore. So those are some of the pieces. So I'm just switching back to my laptop camera. And now I'll switch back to sharing my screen. Okay, so I mentioned all of these things. And I would encourage you actually to use a plug-in shop vac as opposed to a leaf blower that's battery powered, only because the thing will be so popular you'll run out of batteries before you run out of people. It will happen every time. So just a few things about where to get these. Sorry that this is slightly cut off, but I think you'll figure it out. Pasco actually sells this device, so pasco.com. It's pricey. It's $550, and then they want another $130 for a specific air blower. Frankly, I can save you easily $100 on the air blower just by buying yourself a shop vac from Home Depot, which is only $30 and not $130. Just make sure it has a blow mode. Shop vac will have a suck mode for sure, and most of them also have a blow mode. On the other hand, my recommendation is not to buy $550 worth of one board, but to make your own. Frankly, for less than half of that amount, you can actually make 2 boards and 2 seats and buy 2 blowers, all for less than half the cost of one board from Pasco. So Pasco, I use their equipment. I like it. It's very robust, but it's just frankly too expensive. And so I like to build these things as well. Okay, so here's what I want to do now. I want to watch the time. Okay, I want to just list a bunch of demonstrations that one could do with these things, some lessons, and then these could be applied in a physics context and outreach context. For instance, talk about differences between outer space and being on Earth. And then there is, of course, the standard misconception that there's no gravity in outer space. There's plenty of gravity in outer space. My apologies, it's cut off. Free fall is the better way to describe what's going on in outer space, a condition under which you don't notice gravity. Whether you're in outer space or not in outer space, if you are in free fall, you won't notice gravity. So it feels like there's no gravity in outer space. And then just a discussion of how astronauts prepare to live and work in outer space. And so with hovercraft, you can simulate one aspect of that, the no friction aspect. You can go underwater and do, you know, spacesuit training, and you can go in, you know, parabolic flights, but those are expensive. And so this is a much less expensive and more approachable way to do some stuff. And frankly, if you say astronauts or you say space, instead of saying Newton's laws, you say astronaut training, and people will definitely perk up. So here are some of the things you could do. You could do Newton's 3 laws of motion, the 3 standard ones about moving sideways, and then the 3 corollaries about rotating. And then you could talk about astronaut applications such as applying torque about a vertical axis. So building things in space. And it turns out that it will torque you back. That's Newton's 3rd law. And very easy to demonstrate on one of these things. I'll show you a video of that in a moment. You can use a spinning bicycle wheel for steering. Essentially, it's a steering wheel. It's just not attached the way you would expect it to be. So this would be for orientation control or attitude control. And then you can use carbon dioxide, modified carbon dioxide fire extinguisher as a rocket thruster for propulsion. And then you can have a challenge. So a challenge, for instance, would be something like, this is actually interesting to think about. Can you take this vehicle, think of it as your spacecraft, start it here, go to someplace else, perhaps across the room, and stop when you get there, okay? And do all of this with just like a single thruster and maybe a single bicycle wheel and perhaps 2 riders, because it's hard for one person to do both. And so you use the thruster to get going, and then you coast there, and you use the bicycle wheel to spin around, and then you use the thruster to stop. And it sounds good on paper, and it's very hard to accomplish. So let me do the following. Before I even do challenges, let me just show you some quick video clips of some of these particular lesson ideas. So here we go. For instance, when I would start with a group, very typically I would just give everybody a very quick ride. And so hold on to the thing while the person is getting on and off. It is very slippery. Oh, here comes the pedestrian, wondering what we're doing in the hallway. So just obviously you can travel in a straight line, and you can also spin. And you can travel and spin. I talk about people, have you ever played Frisbee? Well, what is it like to be the Frisbee? So everybody gets a quick ride who wants to, for instance. And then here, for instance, is pulling a person with a bungee cord. So the idea is I pull with a single bungee cord a certain amount of force, and then I keep that amount of force as they pick up speed. I just have to stay with them, keeping the same amount of force. And then I can go back and do it over again with 2 bungee cords. And then I can go back and do it over again with 2 people. And you can sort of explore Newton's second law without even having to have anything fancy as far as stopwatches and stuff. Here is a spinning bicycle wheel. So the idea is a wheel that's spinning while you're on such a vehicle, then you can change the direction your angular momentum is pointing, and then it will react, and it becomes a spinning steering wheel. Okay, so now she's starting to hit the walls there, so I just have to get her out in the middle again. But she can literally rotate herself to any orientation she wants, and then just has to untip the wheel to hold her position. I have a couple different wheels, sort of the wheel for big people and the wheel for little people. The wheel for big people is more effective, but little people, it will hit them if they try to use it. Here is torque. So the idea is when you apply torque to something, in this case by trying to rotate a bolt using vice grips, it will torque you back. And if you have plenty of friction, you will usually not even notice that. But if you apply the torque and the friction is unable to stop you, so here we are holding what I call my torque bar or my torque ladder. And so what's going to happen is if he gets himself slightly better balanced, when he applies the torque, it will apply a torque to him. So this is Newton's third law of rotation. And frankly, this is why you get out of control right away if you're in outer space, if you don't watch yourself. So you need special tools, for instance, to make sure that doesn't happen to you. 2 more quickly. Basically, thruster, and the first thing I do with a thruster often is I take off the nozzle that directs all the thrust in one direction, and I just fire it so it fires up and down. Notice the ceiling, basically. So it doesn't kick because it's firing up and down simultaneously. But then once I put a nozzle on it, then I can fire in a single direction. So I'm going to turn it against the wall, and it will kick back. And so now it becomes an actual genuine rocket thruster. And then here's what it looks like to have a person on board using a rocket. This is the most popular demonstration, but frankly the most expensive because it costs $20 or something like that to recharge this fire extinguisher. Carbon dioxide fire extinguishers are actually becoming harder and harder even to come by because it's less expensive to do dry chemical, but they don't kick. So you need pressurized gas. So I told him now fire it for a longer period of time so he picks up a little bit more speed. But in fact, this is a rather confined area, and so not the greatest. Let me go back. So we went through this. So here's some challenges. First of all, 4 challenges, and that is you have to do this on a hard floor, not carpet. It's noisy, so you might disturb other people. So a gymnasium is really best if you can pull it off. And it can be almost too popular. So you run out of batteries before you run out of people, like I mentioned before. You have to modify the fire extinguisher, but this becomes a consumable expense. But then they can be recharged. As far as safety, this is very slippery, so watch out. You do need tenders. You need people to help out beside the person who's riding. And with a spinning wheel, with a spinning wheel, make sure that you don't touch your skin or your hair or your jewelry. And with the thruster, make sure that you stay clear of the exhaust and use it in short bursts. So one last video, and it turns out that a typical spacecraft would not have just a single thruster, but would have several. And so let me just show you something. First of all, let me just show you what this is. It's 3 hovercraft lashed together, and then a 4th hovercraft. It wouldn't have head to beam, just as a platform. And then this, Caitlin here has 2 thrusters, and Monique has 2 thrusters. Hers are parallel, so they can go forward, they can go back, and then they can spin in place. I did this just one time. It was expensive to put together. But it was interesting. This is much more realistic for a spacecraft that would have typically many thrusters, and I'm not even talking gimbal thrusters. I'm talking just about multiple thrusters, so that if they did diagonal thrusting, they could actually spin in place if they wanted to. That's it. Basically, I think everybody should have one. Frankly, I think everybody should have 2. And I hope I've given you some ideas of what you might do with them, whether it's in a upper level or college level physics context or outreach. I use these things for outreach events pretty regularly here in Minnesota. And thank you. I'd be happy to take questions. Richard says he wants one. Richard also says, I bet I could stand on it. That's true. People could stand on these things, but they're liable to fall down. I'm not interested in that, so I don't let people stand on them. But frankly, when I'm not looking, they want to stand on them.
I spend a lot of time skateboarding and snowboarding, so it looks like fun. Is there a website where you have plans on how to build these? Like a step-by-step user guide, for example?
It turns out that there are several, and I follow none of them because I just build them my own way. But what I should do is I should put my plans together. I have good pictures of what I do, and how about I plan to do that? That would be just a good assignment for me, is to put my plans together and let people know who inquire how I go about building these things for much, much less money than buying them from Pasco, although frankly it does take a while.
Okay, James, a question from Indiana.
Go ahead.
Have you tried, instead of using the modified CO2 fire extinguishers, have you tried just another leaf blower? And if so, does it work at all?
Okay, so here's the question was, can you use a leaf blower for propulsion? And the answer is yes, but you could also use a fan for propulsion. But it turns out that both of those are against the rules. The rules being, if this is supposed to be outer space, then a fan won't work, and a leaf blower won't work in outer space. And so, yes, indeed, you could make some progress, probably less so with the leaf blower, more so with a big fan. But I'm not that interested. I'm not trying to make an airboat. I'm trying to make a spacecraft. But it could be done. Less expensive in the long run. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you all. Thank you again to the speakers, and be in touch, keep in touch. More questions are always welcome. And I hope that you're able to join us the next time we do this on 3 completely different topics. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend. Where will this video be posted? I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. When I post the video, I will somehow let people know through the same mechanisms that I let people know about this TED Talk event, and so hopefully the right people will hear about it. Okay?
Okay.
I'll figure it out.
Great.
Probably on the Minnesota Space Grant website. We just don't have a place on that website for videos yet, but I'll make one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
It's really
Thank you.